Kia ora koutou katoa. Thanks for having us. My name is James Cockle and I'm speaking on behalf of Climate Liberation Aotearoa. I'm here today to ask you to start counting emissions from cruise ships and stop ratepayer subsidies to them. These luxury emissions are contributing to climate change. One of this country's leading climate scientists and member of the Climate Change Commission, Professor James Renwick, was interviewed on Otago Access Radio just last year, and he said this: if we do nothing and we let the warming get to 3 or 4 degrees, well, that's pretty much the end of civilization and the end of the economy. According to Climate Action Tracker, New Zealand's action and policies are in line with reaching 3 to 4 degrees, exactly the range expressed in Professor Renwick's warning. I want to deal with the idea that cruise ships bring some benefits because actually the exact opposite is the case. Despite being 9% of international tourist numbers, cruise ships contribute only 3% to total international tourist spend. So cruise ship passengers are dramatically underspending in terms of their contribution to the economy compared to the alternative when tourists choose to fly in instead. Cruise ship tourists are economically the worst tourists for us. So they don't benefit us, but what's wrong with cruise ships? Otago University academic Dr. Inga Smith calculated that a cruise ship holiday to New Zealand emits 4 times the greenhouse gas emissions than an equivalent holiday flying and staying in hotels. She says, from a climate change perspective, going on a cruise ship is one of the worst holidays that you can take. The cruise ship industry that is polluting is that polluting that climate activists like me would actually encourage people to fly instead. Cruise ships cause other air pollution too. The heavy fuel oil that they burn puts ultra-fine small particles into the air. These are carcinogenic. Now, in terms of these polluting small particles, one cruise ship is actually equivalent to 1 million cars. And these particles are very small, like they're mostly invisible, so we don't think about it. But the cost we are paying is very, very real. The cost is paid when people die from cancer. According to a peer-reviewed study, in the Marine Policy Journal, cruise ships are responsible for 1/4 of all ocean waste, despite being only 1% of the merchant fleet. The amount of water taken by Port Otago from the Port Chalmers area can increase tenfold from around 2% to between 20 to 30% when they provide water to cruise ships. In summary, not only do cruise ships bring us no benefits, but they are contributing to climate chaos. They are killing people with air pollution, they trash our oceans, they take more water than we can afford, and their working conditions have been described in some cases to be as bad as semi-slavery. We request that cruise ship emissions be counted in Dunedin's total emissions and be included in our emissions reduction plan. The idea that we can't count emissions because of data difficulties is frankly ridiculous. Christchurch is counting cruise ship emissions. If they can do it, so can we. We acknowledge that taking action on climate change can be hard, especially with a government which has demonstrated hostility towards climate action through its policies. But this is not a reason to stop acting, however. Declarations of climate emergency and the nuclear-free movement both work like this, with local government taking the lead. Ratepayer money is used to subsidise rail excursions, which are heavily used by cruise ship passengers. And in 2022 to 23 season, it was estimated that that subsidy alone came to $786,000. We are paying ratepayers' money to subsidise rich countries that are net negative for us environmentally and economically. And it's time to stop. In summary, what we want you to do is to count cruise ship emissions now in the city's climate targets. The statistics might be estimates, they're not perfect, but the risks of inaction are far greater. We also want you to actually put in a real plan, a serious plan to address these emissions with the first steps of stopping all the subsidies. Thank you for your time. Any questions?
Well timed, Mr. Cockle. Yes, we have a question from Councillor Vandevers to start. why would we count cruise ship emissions here in Dunedin when, as you've already said, Christchurch is already counting the cruise ship emissions, and they're the same cruise ships? I mean, why would we spend ratepayer money on employing somebody to count emissions for the cruise ships that are here when they're the same ones and it's already been done in Christchurch?
Thank you for that question. The way that the Christchurch is counting their emissions, as I understand it, is their portion of the emissions. So they're doing their bit. We need to start doing our bit by counting our portion of those emissions. If we then can charge them for those emissions, we can include that in the cost. We can take that money back.
Are you suggesting that the emissions of a cruise ship in our port are different from the emissions of a cruise ship in Christchurch? Surely it's the same cruise ship, and surely we don't have to spend the money and time counting them here when they've already counted them for us.
Absolutely, we could save money by using their numbers, but we still need to account for them. So although, you know, if they've got a good method of counting them, we should use that, absolutely. But what I'm talking about is accounting for them, you know, in our budgets and in our targets, and ensuring that they're paid for. If they're going out into the atmosphere, we can't just put our heads in the sand and pretend that they don't exist.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks, James, for coming in. A couple of questions. Firstly, you'll be aware of the movements around the world. I mean, places like Venice, where there's a big backlash to cruise ships, and many other cities now have instigated what is quite a large user tax per passenger to be used for other investments, in such as rail, for example. Would you support us looking to do something similar here?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that money could be then spent. It could be a win-win for us in Dunedin. We could stop subsidising them, take that money, invest it into local rail for local Dunedin people. That then reduces the costs of living for our people, and it reduces our emissions as well. So I can't see any negatives to doing that.
And second question is, I think you and your group will be aware, I think ourselves and Mexico are two of the non-signatories to MARPOL. Would you encourage us to keep putting pressure on the government for us to become a signatory to that, which of course impels places to have things like ship-to-shore power, for example?
I'm not too familiar with that, to be honest with you. Sorry, but yeah.
Worth investigating. And final question is, a general question I'll probably ask a lot of people in the next few months, in the auspices of a large rate rise being signalled. Would you and your group be happy for ratepayers' money to go into investments such as rail, for example?
Absolutely, it's an investment in our future, and it will actually save our community's money in the long run. So I think it's well worth doing.
Thank you. Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Cockle. Would you be able to send through your presentation to the GSOs, if you would?
Yes, absolutely, and that includes the references for all the facts that I've stated as well.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Councillor Mayhem.
Kia ora, James. Thank you so much for coming along today. When you're talking about counting emissions, that is from one port to another port. So when a ship leaves Christchurch, it's creating a carbon trail when it reaches here, or would we be measuring where the ship goes from Dunedin to the next port?
Well, ultimately, they all need to be counted. You know, right from Australia, comes in up to the top of the North Island, down the North Island, down to the South Island, round to Fiordland. Who's counting them there? So, you know, I guess that the devil's in the detail with that. Christchurch has got our way of counting them, and I think we should follow suit with what they're doing. But, you know, we need to also be good citizens and make sure that those emissions are being counted, you know, wherever they are, not just thinking that one small portion is enough. You know, as I said, they're going into the atmosphere, you know. Thanks.
And one last question from Councillor Vandervis.
You said in one of your facts that the cruise ships take more water than we can afford. Are you aware that since we've had the closure of the PPCS Meatworks, the Green Island Tannery, Cadbury's and a number of other businesses, that in fact we have plenty of spare water in the system and that the cruise ships actually pay us quite handsomely for it?
Can I raise a point of order here? We had water shortages this summer. So I'd like to raise a point of order of inaccuracy from the councillor.
I think we had water shortages in certain localities where, depending on where... Oh, yeah,
It is a singular system, Your Worship.
Yes. And we don't have any technical information about how much water is available in Port Chalmers and whether they took it from there. So I think it's getting to be quite a technical question, both for us to ask and for you to answer, I think. Do you have any technical data on that, some actual data on that? No.
Your Worship, you haven't ruled on Councillor Vandervis' statement.
Well, on the face of it, it seems a reasonable question. However, you know, there's other elements that then come into it. So, I think we'll uphold the question, and ask that in addition to that, I won't uphold the point of order, allow the question to be asked, but do you have actual data on actual amounts of water when and where that was taken? And was that taken when we had a shortage in Port Chalmers?
My understanding is that the water's being taken at the moment while there are restrictions in place. People at Port Chalmers are very unhappy about that, and I think that they'd like to know which of the councillors are out supporting them and which ones aren't too concerned.
Right. Thank you.
Yes.
I'll leave it at that because I think that covers both sides of that question, actually. So thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.